Aaron, good morning.
Good morning, Brent.
Aaron, so we've been doing some work together at ABC Fitness, and you shared just an awesome story of how, in your role VP of Sales, the pandemic became a moment of opportunity. It forced you and others to sort of rebuild the whole sales strategy and approach around agility and continuous skills development, and how it led to some fantastic results. So, I wanted you to be able to share that with our audience this morning, and just starting with the crisis you experienced.
Yeah, so you're in 2020, obviously the world shut down because of the pandemic. And us being in the fitness space, we're actually a large provider of software for gyms that check in, and we're the billing platform. It really took our industry by storm. And it took at the time, we didn't think of it as something that was going to be advantageous for us on the sales side. Obviously, our whole business shut down and went from our portfolio of 8,600 clients. 95% of them were shut down or forcefully shut down by government legislation. Closures, and it was very focused. Depending upon regions, right? The South region kind of opened up a little bit faster, but the West and the Northeast were a little bit slower. And it's not something that you really prepare for. And so our CEO had to our leadership team had to make some key decisions. And, at that time, we were forced to furlough many of our sales, teammates. And when we look at it, we were sitting at an organization of about, 17 employees at that point, 18 employees. And we went down to basically the essentials. So it was myself, my TSE, my senior VP of Rev Ops. And we kind of took that time to really think through a lot of our strategy and our approach to sales. And I look at it as the blessing in disguise, right? Nobody wants their business to shut down. I mean, we had, high aspirations of our revenue growth. And when we looked at it, slowing down to basically a dead stop where we were doing somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40 to 50 contracts a month to 4 or 5. That's a big change.
Yeah.
So what we did was it forced me, one, to get back into Salesforce as a rep, right? As a quota carrier, because I had to do a lot of the work. And so actually you would never think through like the actual way that Salesforce was orged, the click-throughs, the way we looked at our pipeline strategy, the way we progressed deals, the milestones that we wanted to have within each deal stage. We actually started to make adjustments and started to reorg and reframe the organization of Salesforce, because I'm a big believer in the way that we operate, the standard operating procedures, the clicks and all that stuff leads to really good reporting. And that's what really kind of me and my SVP of ops, Brandon, we actually went through and started to think through. So we took a step back, started to think through our holistic strategy. We actually made an intentional move to pivot toward account-based, management, about account-based selling, right? Where we were going to start ordering the Salesforce based around account hierarchies, looking through our actual deal progression. We were going to actually introduce a new pipeline philosophy in terms of the way that we manage the deal cycle. In addition to that, getting to certain milestones and then introducing a new concept called a forecast category, which our board really wanted us to do. So not only did we have pipeline stages, but we also started to introduce the concept of a forecast category, which was the confidence in the deal from the rep and the leader. And
So you really used the opportunity to sort of drill into your pipeline, right? And I remember you saying you should have shut down 80% of the pipeline, but it probably helped you understand like who were your best buyers, even in a tough period, and that sort of help with the shift towards account-based strategies.
Yeah, so when we pivoted to account-based strategy, we focused a lot on our ICP, right? What is our ideal client profile? Now, keep in mind, Brent, we were an owner-led company for 38 years. So it was owned by a family. And then we were at this point about 18 months into the private equity that had acquired us. So there was a lot of changes going on. If you look at it, when I came on to ABC, we were very immature in terms of our sales methodology, our sales process, just sales infrastructure, right? When I say we were on Excel as our CRM, that's not a joke. We really were looking at like how we organized just our targets based off of a simple CRM process, all the way to an evolution of where we're at today, about 6 years later. So there's just that natural growth, that maturity, the sophistication in which, people are asking questions about the business. Not only that, they're looking at, building predictable processes, predictable KPIs, reporting. The way we view the business has evolved a lot. And so that was at a very early time in that phase, in which it allowed us to slow down and really think through some of these things, right? Changing a pipeline philosophy is challenging, right?
Mm.
You have a whole pipeline that's there. This actually forced us to reset. So we actually went through 80% of the deals and lost them because they were at a net neutral. They were not being engaged. So it gave us a chance to fully reset, or fully restart, introduce a new pipeline methodology, restructure Salesforce, really start to think through our strategy, go to account base, thinking through the whole, end from a lead process all the way to the evaluation, which we call our op phase, all the way down to how we transition into onboarding. So it really gave us a lot of time to think through that strategy.
That's great. Yeah, getting to the ideal customer. And I know then as you got to the ideal customer, you thought about launching a BDR team.
Correct.
And you
So
shared in quotes that it was one of the worst moves ever,
yeah,
but good on you that you took it as a moment of learning about how you actually run a BDR team, because now you have a successful one. Share more on that.
yeah. So what we did was we started to identify our ICP, and then we really were on this project of identifying our TAM, which is our total addressable market, but really more importantly, what our SAM was, our serviceable addressable, and then looking at what are kind of the tertiary markets that we could grow into or flex the system with additional feature functionality or development work from our product team. So when you look at the fitness space, that's a big number. That's really the holy grail of like any type of sales organization, is really to develop the strategy around a SAM, right? What is your serviceable addressable market, right? And so we started to dig into that work and really identify like what our core buyer personas were. What were the clients that really, did well with our technology, really appreciated the services that we had, and we started to really hone in. And the first iteration of this was we started to target what we called an A account, which was a bullseye. We thought this is the club that has a high propensity to buy, really values the product, really can use our service. And then we started to target it like an ABC. And we started to really start to think through that strategy around it. And so that SAM actually was pretty big. And, my CEO at the time was really, he was leading our sales. So he actually was, kind of in place of the CRO. At that time, we didn't have a CRO. And he wanted to launch a BDR function to help us in terms of prospect management, but also introduce an inside sales function that would actually take some of the smaller deals. So we actually went through the process. Instead of standing it up ourselves, we actually outsourced it with an outsourced company that was a BDR. And I'll share that it was an 8-month project that didn't go very well in terms of the results, but we actually learned a lot during that process. And I would share that we learned a lot in terms of, how to onboard, how the structure of onboarding a BDR really they taught us, some of the KPI metrics and some of the process flows. It was so detailed. Even though the results weren't what we wanted, we took a lot of key things that were away from that. And we also, I think more importantly, Brent, we understood exactly what we didn't want from a BDR team. We understood that there was a need for the business in terms of a business development. We look at it, and I always explain this to some of my, people in my network in terms of like when they're looking at launching a BDR, you can actually go wider with reps. And that means you have them kind of taking all the prospect calls, doing all the lead management, doing that stuff. And that's a very, sophisticated resource, right? That what we call an SAE, a senior account executive. You can continue to add those to add capacity, or you can go deeper and take some of those tasks off and then go with that development of the BDR team. and we decided to really double down on the BDR team. But we actually reimagined and launched it ourselves. And we actually had stage progressions in terms of how we wanted the milestones to really develop them. And it took us about 12 months to get to a fully functional operational BDR team. But we gradually added more to their kind of requirements. But we started off very, very small. And that's one of the things I would suggest. I remember talking through this with my with Brandon, my senior VP of operations, and we were looking at just milestones around activity and just really making it fun for them, and defining what success looked like, and then adding capabilities when we started training them on certain things we wanted to do, enriching accounts, outbound prospecting. Now we have a fully functioning BDR team that really supports our sales organization. If we look at it last year, I mean, we had 500, what we define as a success, 543 successes for the year. They had 680,000 in pipeline. They generated
546 successes, meaning
correct.
a
So
meeting set or a
meeting set. So what we call a success is a zero op meeting to discovery.
Yep.
When you look at that, we actually had a 50% promoted op, meaning 50% of those actually went into an opportunity phase that went through the deal cycle. They actually closed somewhere in the neighborhood of 170K from those ops. So we actually opened up with that BDR team, 1.5 territories, and it also relieved the actual capacity for the SAEs, right? So now that those tasks are on the BDR team now.
Yep.
And I would share this. One of the things that was a byproduct of it is we looked at succession planning. We've actually promoted 2 BDRs to SAEs this year, and they're actually our newest, fastest up and coming SAEs right now. We had one that actually achieved Excellence Club last year, but it gave us a breeding ground to really nurture, incorporate them into our culture, really understand our product, because it's a very complex product. And so they spent about 9 months as a BDR, really understanding our sales process, our sales motion, product, knowledge, all of that stuff. And then we graduated them to an SAE when they were doing very, very well. But I would say that they understand the prospect mechanics now as an SAE. They're highly trained in that. So they're a lot more self-efficient in the SAE process. They also have a higher connection rate to the BDR because they understand that role. So they're able to kind of guide that BDR and their territory plans. So it's worked out fairly well.
It's awesome. And the other thing it touches on is, I know part of this rebuild was, as you started to bring people back on, this focus on just continuous learning and reteaching
Correct.
people proper discovery, cold call strips, prospecting talk tracks. So would love to hear now, as you rebuilt the BDR team, but then you started to bring the sales team back, just how you focused on the skills as an edge.
Yeah, and so you bring up a good point. I think I'm a firm believer in educating our sales rep, building a culture around what we term a growth mindset. And this is fairly intentional. And, I shared with you when I started to build out this sales team 6 years ago, 5 years ago, we weren't fortunate enough to have very high salaries in which we could bring on, what I would term very good to elite salespeople in a B2B business. And we're also in a niche market. So we're in fitness. And when you look at some of the lead sellers in SaaS, they actually are kind of outside of our industry, and a little bit more complex sales. So we had to actually really reimagine our strategy around how we onboarded SAEs. In addition to that, a learning and development strategy around that, because we couldn't attract that top level talent in our industry. We just, they're looking at, going to some of the higher end SaaS companies. And there's 2 things we thought of. Number one is, do we pay this high salary and risk somebody that comes into our network or into our organization and really isn't passionate about the product we sell? Or do we take people, which there's a plethora of them, and they're very, very passionate about fitness, passionate about fitness operations, and understand the gym dynamics, can communicate in the language that owner operators really understand. and then teach them B2B sales. And so what we did was we actually went down that path. And for me, I felt it was easier to attract that talent. They weren't requiring a high salary. They weren't requiring a higher OTE. And then we could build a learning and development program that really taught them the nuances of B2B sales. So this comes from how to prospect. I mean, it's shocking, but like how to do an email template workshop, call script strategies, right? Close win losses, understanding your deal cycle, why we progress certain things in the deal cycle, teaching them a sales methodology. We actually brought in Gene from value selling and actually did a lot of value selling workshops in terms of how to really get through the discovery process and identify buyer needs and problems and how do we solution them. We coined a term, don't take the bait, right? Really dig into the problems, really dig into the problems. And we trained on this. And when I say this, we have 5 hours of learning and development still to this day for our reps, even though the tenure is, the average tenure is 3 years or more. We actually still to this day, me and Lee, my national sales director, still actually host 5 hours of continuing development. And it's something that we truly believe. It's kind of
Per
like
month?
per week. We do
Per
5
week.
hours per week. So from an email template workshop to actually, sales training to, whether it's, the marketing workshops, how we're going to actually support the marketing programs. We're detailed in terms of supporting them because, we're a firm believer. We're going to ask you to do a lot, but we're also going to provide you all the tools to make sure that you can achieve all your goals. And I think that's a key distinction in terms of what we do. And we've gotten pushback from the reps like, hey, this is a lot in terms of just within the work week. And we continue to press that, part of the success that we've had is part of us empowering the team to really achieve the goals that they need to do or that we're asking them to do. I think is more important.
And then, so you had this reboot, you reset on the sales strategy and process, went to a more of an account-based strategy, actually spent the time to build the right BDR team to address your SAM, focus on, as you kind of brought the team back, continuous training, 5 hours a week, so almost an hour a day. Curious, what were the results as the industry started to come back? What did that look like?
Yeah, so Brent, we've had 3 of our best years at ABC Fitness Solution, and we continue to evolve in terms of our development of our team. So when you look at the snapshot of coming out of 2020, where we called it, the July to December start, that time, 2020, July to December, the back half of 2020 when we restarted. We restarted on what I would term a cold start, meaning we had no sales activity prior to July. We cleaned out our pipeline. We went down to 20%. We were very disciplined about what we called a deal op. We wanted to keep no false indicators of ops in our pipeline. We wanted to make sure that it was true active. And that's one thing I would share in terms of pipeline management, being very disciplined about, what is an active op has been a huge game changer in us and understanding exactly where our pipeline is. But we actually went back and, from July to December, we actually did better in 2020 than we did that same snapshot, July to December in 2019. So we actually put up about 102% of that year, coming off of pandemic, coming off of stale pipeline where it was a cold start. We actually took the team from 12 reps and an additional leader down to 6. So we actually did it with less reps, saved half of our labor budget in terms of that, which is just goodness to the business. But we were just really disciplined about making sure we executed on the basics and really did well. So we actually got to a really good spot. Now, 2021, we had a full year and, we actually, as a team, we grew by 1 RSM. So we built the capacity of another territory. We introduced our new BDR team March of that year. So we spent a lot of time from March to the end of the year, really developing the strategy around the BDR team. And we actually performed at about 103% of that revenue target for 2021, which at that time was actually the biggest year that we had.
Which was about 20% growth from 2020, I
Correct.
believe.
Yeah, which is a 20% growth of our actual budget, not of actuals, because we shut down. So we actually increased the budget in 2021 over 2022 budget, and we were able to achieve that. We also introduced a couple new products, which we were really excited about. In 2022, we're coming off of our record-breaking year again. That's when we brought in our national sales director. We've actually had a couple org changes in terms of our structure just to grow with the capacity. We've actually, changed a couple additional leadership positions to support the sales org. But we did, 114% of our budget this year in 2020, and then 130% over year prior. So just building out that sales infrastructure. And I think, it really comes back to executing against a strategy, right? We are very intentional about where we spend our time as leaders. We look through and, something that is kind of common in our leadership, our sales leadership, is we look at what is our single point of failure and how do we develop a plan to address that single point of failure. If you look at last year, there was two things we focused on. One was the BDR acceleration. How do we fully stand up the BDR to support the goals and support the opportunity growth that we need in order to hit and achieve our targets? And we put a lot of focus and energy on that. In addition to that, we built this whole outbound philosophy in terms of everybody owns a piece of the pipeline opportunity creation. Not only is it a BDR function, it's an RSM, it's an account management, just that culture of being excited about creating ops. Which we understood that was going to lead us to more opportunities and close win deals. In addition to that, we went through a process of, succession planning, as I just shared with you. How do we upskill our talent, not only from the 5 hours of training, but also a succession plan that allowed us the flexibility to change out reps and upgrade certain territories in a manner that wouldn't be disruptive to the business. So we were able to change 3 sales reps out of 7, which is about, close to 50%, about 40% of our sales work last year to make sure that we're prepared for this year.
Cool. What are the adjustments this year?
So the adjustments this year is obviously working on, introducing the coordination between marketing and sales. We're really, that's the work that we're doing with you in terms of the life cycle management. Marketing across the whole entire life cycle journey and linking, the prospect journey all the way through to the account management. We think that's going to give us a huge uplift, not only in our account management side, which is, dealing with the cross-sell, upsell opportunities, but really aligning the value proposition across the life cycle. That's something that we're doubling down on this year that we feel will be huge in the holistic journey of supporting our prospect to member journey. In addition to that, one of the things that we're really becoming very disciplined is around our discount strategy. What we looked at last year is, we have a propensity to discount about 70% of the deals. So we're fairly disciplined around how do we build value? How do we get to a certain strategy around discounting and the economics of the deal? And is there variations to the discount that can make the buyer and the consumer that doesn't change the economics, the long-term viability of the deal versus one-time discounts or concessions of a month or something like that, and that give the buyer the same feeling that they won or the feeling that they got something. So we're really getting disciplined around that, because if we discount 10% and we stay disciplined around that and formulate a different strategy, that's 10% we can add to our goal achievements.
Yeah. Aaron, congrats on all the success. Comes right from the agility and the learner mindset that you're instilling in your team. So awesome how you model it to others. Congrats on your success, and thanks so much for your time today.
All right. Thanks, Brent.